We've got a good agenda, and a lot of good items in. The agendas are in your seats or packed up. I'm also going to send around the sign-up sheet. If you're a member of the coalition, we can put your name and email, and even if you're not, please, sign up and put that around. So we'll circulate those if we can, and we'll kind of get started. I want to first, before we have comments, ask you to join me and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Thanks for City of Stewart for hosting us again. We certainly appreciate that. I see Commissioner Chris in the back. Thank you. And other I may miss, Ben, thanks for hosting us here at City of Stewart Hall. We're just really appreciate that. Right kind of in the beginning, I don't have a lot of chairman's comments or things that the coalition's kind of working hard on some things. Next month, we have Colonel Bowman's going to be here to address us directly again, and we appreciate that. That'll be March 27th. And then today we've got a great presentation. Eve's going to work on that in a minute, but before we get started, we're remembering one of our champions, one of our warriors, river warriors, who passed on recently. And do you roll these slides? Yeah, this is Kenny Hinkle. Kenny, many of you might have remembered Kenny. He organized and did a lot of work in the early beginnings and helped the Rivers Coalition kind of rally up, if you will. And he was very vocal, very active, did a lot of videography and things too to help just kind of rally the troops. There he is. I mean, he was just amazing. And I might want to ask Jim Moyer if he could say a few words. Jim?
Thank you. Kenny was a hero and a champion for the river. He was one of the founders of Bull Sugar. He was a board member of the Riverkeeper. He was an inspiration. And I think, unfortunately, he became very desperately sad. And I think this is a challenge to us all. Environmentalism can be kind of bleak. And Kenny went through Hurricane Helene up in Asheville, and then actually came back here for Hurricane Mitch. It was his last time on Earth was not happy. We need to take care of each other. We need to be careful with ourselves, and we need to support each other in these environmentalism causes. And I think it's really important. There are way too many young people that have passed away recently because of this concern, this fear, this sadness over environmental loss. And I think that the Rivers Coalition can do a good piece of healing and providing some optimism. If we can get the water moving south, we can save this estuary. Thank you.
All right. Appreciate everybody having that moment of silence for Kenny. And just have him rest in peace. Thanks. All right. Moving on to our agenda, we've got a couple of new members that are we want to introduce to you. They're organizations that have come aboard. We have Admiralty Yacht Club and also Farm Vets. I believe Patrick Malone's here and also Jim Harder going to talk about Admiralty Yacht Club. Jim, you got a few words to say just about the organization as they join.
The Admiralty Yacht Club is the Admiralty next to Meridian Marine in Palm City. We have 44 members of the Admiralty Yacht Club. I'm one of the members, but Chris, who is the president of the Admiralty Yacht Club, is going to represent them as as a member representing them. Chris Grizel, when you get a chance, he comes in and you meet him. He was a Top Gun pilot, did over 300 landings on an aircraft carrier. He taught how to land on an aircraft carrier. Then he ran an airlines out of Mumbai, India for 3 years. Then he ran an airline out of Dubai for 5 years. He lives here now, and he just left yesterday for Dubai because he's on the board of directors for the International Christian Association. So,
All right, welcome. All right. Patrick, are you Patrick Malone here today from, this is Farm Vets. Farm Vets is an organization. They're a 501c3 and they've done a lot of water testing and things that they do for nitrogen, phosphorus levels in the lake and the St. Lucie and others. They were, applying to DEP for some water quality grants and looking to help do some water quality improvements in the area. So we kind of reviewed them, and he's the president of Vets Farm. So go online to see more about that organization and learn more about them. We welcome them aboard too. Okay, so we're going to get into our presentation. I'm going to hand it over to Eve, and we have Casey. Thanks for helping today. Casey's filling in, helping us out with our presentations and connection to our Zoom. Casey, how many participants do we have on Zoom coming up here? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, well, that's good. We have 15. So let's turn it over to, I think that's working, that mic. Eve, if that mic's working, you have to turn it on. Yep.
Testing. Thanks. Mark does it all.
No.
Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody. How are you today? Good. All right. My name is Eve Samples. I am honored to serve on the board of directors of the Rivers Coalition, and I'm also executive director at Friends of the Everglades. And like all of you, or most of you, I've spent a lot of time in this room over the years talking about the Lake Okeechobee discharges and the harm they cause our river. So I'm going to talk to you today about a solution. And I think in light of what Jim said about Kenny and the challenges that can face us, we all need a solution we can rally around. And I have some good news to share today. There's a solution, it's fundable, it's actionable, and now's the time. So with that said, just want to do a quick little poll here. How many of you were in this area and maybe spent time in this room in 2013, during the lost summer of 2013? Okay, keep your hands up. How many of you were in this room and spent time along the river in 2016? Toxic 2016, 2018. Okay, so a majority of this room has watched as our river has suffered under the status quo, Lake Okeechobee discharges, and the map you see here are the constraints that we live in. Not enough storage south of Lake Okeechobee forces water to be discharged east by the Army Corps of Engineers, west by the Army Corps of Engineers. And I say forces only because we're giving about 400,000 acres of sugarcane south of the lake near perfect irrigation and drainage. Meanwhile, the southern end of the system, Everglades National Park and Florida Bay, still don't get enough clean fresh water. So none of this is new to any of you. We've talked about this for years, decades, and where have we gotten? So I want to orient you because we haven't seen this in our river in some years, but this was Sewell's Point in 2005, a striking picture. This is a public health threat to our community. It's an economic threat to our community. And of course, the ecology of our river and our entire community suffers when we deal with toxic algae blooms like these. Just an assembly of pictures from what we've lived through. That by the land image out on the beach. How many of you were in that? Okay. I bet Kenny Hinkle was in there too. That mantra became a rallying cry for our community when we were dealing with those terrible years in 2013, 2016, and 2018, because we have long known that the ultimate solution for the discharges to the St. Lucie River, to the Caloosahatchee, and to the southern part of the system lies in acquiring and restoring more land south of Lake Okeechobee. That has not changed. This is the St. Lucie Inlet in 2023. Just last year, we had discharges. This is January 2025. We're currently experiencing Lake Okeechobee discharges in the name of recovery for the lake, but harm to our estuaries. We've talked about that in this group. So where are we now? We've talked about solutions for many years. We're 25 years into the comprehensive Everglades restoration plan. We're still living with harmful Lake Okeechobee discharges. The southern end of the system still isn't getting enough flows. Florida is falling short on water quality standards for the Everglades that will be coming up upon court-mandated deadlines in the next year or so. And while the EAA reservoir, which was approved in 2018 during one of those really dire years, will provide more water storage, it will not provide enough to stop harmful discharges and restore enough clean flow to the southern Everglades and Florida Bay. And why is that? Because we did not buy the land. We never bought the land. So this headline might ring a bell for you. We all showed up, thousands of us showed up at Phipps Park when we had discharges. We rallied around the mantra, buy the land. We had a Senate president from Stewart, Senate President Joe Negron, who took up the cause and advanced Senate Bill 10 back in 2017, 2018. That bill got approved. At the time, they were talking about tens of thousands of acres that needed to be acquired in the Everglades agricultural area south of the lake. Again, Senator Negron advanced that cause, championed it, and through the sausage making in Tallahassee, eminent domain was prohibited, okay, fine, and willing sellers were identified as needed to solve this problem. The problem was no willing sellers ever came to the table. The land south of the lake is mostly owned by Florida Crystals and U.S. Sugar. So we got the EAA reservoir, and we got it on land that was already owned by the state of Florida on about 16,500 acres. That includes the STA, the stormwater treatment area, as opposed to the tens of thousands of acres that were discussed as being needed. So I know I was going to tell you guys about a solution, and I promise I'm getting there. That's all the bad news. About a year ago, we at Friends of the Everglades decided to really drill down on this question. What would it take to finish the job? What would it take to stop harmful discharges to the St. Lucie estuary once and for all? Also to prevent harmful discharges to the Caloosahatchee. Sometimes the Caloosahatchee needs some dry season flows, so we know they need some water. To restore the ecology of the southern Everglades and to restore adequate flows to Florida Bay. So we answered that question. Our science team drilled down on it, and it looks like the image on the right, and I'm going to tell you what the numbers are. We still need at least 100,000 acres of land south of Lake Okeechobee for shallow water storage and water treatment. The water treatment component is just critical because there is no Everglades restoration unless the water is clean. We cannot send dirty water south. So we can drill down on the numbers, and I'm happy to go into the details after with anyone who wants to really get into them. But what it amounts to is about 75% of that 100,000 or so acres for a shallow reservoir and 25% for man-made marshes. The math we did, our science team did, calculated the amount of man-made marshes, stormwater treatment areas, needed to clean that water in the shallow reservoir so that it can then go south. This isn't static storage in some rock pit south of the lake. This is dynamic storage. You store it, you treat it, you move it south. Again, about 1 million acre feet more feet of water storage are needed. So an acre foot, I was just talking to someone about how abstract that can sound to people. An acre foot of water is 1 foot deep on an acre of land. We need about 1 million acre feet of water storage. These are big numbers, and this is in addition to the EAA reservoir that's already in progress. This is not about derailing the EAA reservoir. This is about finishing the job. What will we get if we acquired about 100,000 acres south of Lake Okeechobee? I already mentioned we would prevent Lake Okeechobee discharges to the northern estuaries, harmful discharges. We would send adequate clean water south. We would achieve those water quality standards that are so critical for the southern Everglades. We also would provide a foundation for climate resilience for our state. We know that the climate era we're living in is going to bring more extreme rainfall events. We saw some just about a year ago in Fort Lauderdale. Fort Lauderdale had an off-the-charts rain event, and we're going to need more large-scale water storage for these rainfall events to prevent flooding in the future. And the only place in the southern half of the peninsula for large-scale water storage is south of Lake Okeechobee. And then finally, and Blair Wickstrom, who's on our board of directors, is going to talk about this when I wrap up, this isn't just about buying land and restoring it. This is about creating a destination, new habitat, perhaps an outdoor mecca for bird watching, hunting perhaps, dark skies. So imagine what 100,000 acres of sugarcane, which by the way is propped up at every level of government, federal, state, local. Imagine bringing an ecological and outdoor mecca to that part of the state and the benefits that could bring to our economy. Okay, so I just threw a whole bunch of big numbers at you. I just said we need to buy 100,000 acres south of Lake Okeechobee, 1 million acre feet of water storage, and I'm sure many of you are sitting there asking yourselves, how in the world do we pay for this? And there is a very clear and compelling answer. Do you remember Amendment 1, which was passed by Florida voters back in 2014? How many of you voted yes on Amendment 1? Okay, it should be at least 75% of the room because 75% of Florida voters voted yes. That amendment provides funding through dock stamp revenue. These are fees on real estate transactions for 20 years. So we passed it in 2014. We're halfway through it. We have another 9 to 10 years of Amendment 1 revenue. We worked with the law clinic at Stetson's law school to crunch the numbers. That's going to bring in between $1.2 to $1.6 billion a year to the state's land acquisition trust fund for the next 10 years. So there's quite a bit of money coming, and it's right there in the name, the Land Acquisition Trust Fund. We know that over the past decade, many of those funds that have flowed into the Land Acquisition Trust Fund have been misspent, and that has been litigated. But this is a new day, and we have a compelling need, and we have a real case to make for spending that money right in the decade ahead. There's a huge cost of inaction. If you go to our website, everglades.org/rescue, where you can read details about this plan, we detail the public health costs, the economic costs. There are citations, volumes of research have been done on the costs of the status quo of the rigged system that forces Lake Okeechobee discharges into our communities, gives hundreds of thousands of acres of sugarcane south of the lake, perfect conditions, and deprives the southern Everglades. So these are just a few examples. As a reminder, we had emergency declarations in many counties in 2018. Of course, there's a cost to that. The tourism impacts were $2.62 billion just from red tide on the West Coast that year, which by the way is fed by Lake Okeechobee discharges. Beach cleanup costs alone were more than $7 million that year. I say beach cleanup. This isn't picking up trash. This was picking up dead marine life, thousands of tons of dead marine life on the beaches in 2018. And then real estate. This is something that I think is really close to our community because the Rivers Coalition brought a lawsuit years ago related to real estate values and property values. And a study showed that almost $2 billion in potential property value was lost due to Lake Okeechobee discharges. So let's just be clear. There's a real cost of not acting to finally finish the job and solve this problem. This is not a new idea at all. What's new is that we went back to the drawing board a year ago, factored in the water storage and treatment we're going to get from the EAA reservoir, and calculated what it would take to finish the job that we didn't finish back in 2018 with SB 10. But as long ago as 2005, the Everglades Coalition, which embodies about 60 groups, recommended plans for EAA storage should be at least 150,000 acres. We got maybe about 30 since then, so we still need at least 100,000. 2008, the Everglades Coalition recommended about 1 million to 1.5 million acre feet of water storage in the EAA. So we're getting about 240,000 through the EAA reservoir. We still need at least 1 million more. And in 2016, a similar resolution. So there's been broad consensus for many years. That hasn't changed. What's changed is we just stopped talking about it for some reason. I think we thought that the EAA reservoir was getting the job done, but it's not getting the job done. We're still getting discharges. We haven't had a year as terrible as 2018, but if we have an extremely wet, rainy hurricane season, it is entirely probable that we will have toxic algae conditions again. We can't douse all the algae on Lake Okeechobee with algicides. We can't use innovative technologies to get ourselves out of this problem. The only way to solve this problem for the long term is adequate water storage and treatment south of Lake Okeechobee so we can replumb the system. So why now? I mentioned the Amendment 1 factor. The clock is ticking on Amendment 1 funds. We have 9 more years of those, that more than $1 billion a year flowing to the Land Acquisition Trust Fund. There are also a couple of other reasons that now is the time. Recently, the 2 big sugar companies, U.S. Sugar and Florida Crystals, proposed an 8,600-acre rock mine south of Lake Okeechobee. It's called the Southland, quote unquote, Water Resources Project. They're very intentionally not talking about it as a rock mine, even though it would mine limestone rock. So there's urgency there. The future of the EAA, the future of what happens south of Lake Okeechobee is the greatest predictor of how our community will survive and our odds of stopping the discharges finally. And then finally, we talk a lot about the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan. It was authorized by Congress in 2000, signed by then President Bill Clinton. Funds have been flowing. All parties, leaders from all parties champion that, and we can't let anyone think that when SERP projects are done that we will have finished the job, because again, we'll still be living with the reality that Lake Okeechobee discharges will still occur because we haven't acquired enough land for water storage and treatment south of Lake O. And just for reference, when the EAA reservoir is done, if it functions as envisioned, it combined with all over other SERP projects will stop about 50% of harmful discharges to the estuaries. So that's half, that's not all. So we launched Rescue the River of Grass back on January 29th, and we've had a really great response. We have about 10,000 people who have signed the petition in just 4 weeks. And I'm here today to invite all of you to do the same. This isn't just about putting your name on a petition. I know petitions are a dime a dozen. This is about joining a community of people who recognize that we need to finish the job and that it's possible, and now is the time. We have some great partners, including Calusa Waterkeeper on the west coast of Florida, Indian Riverkeeper, thank you, Jim Moyer. We interviewed him on the river doing some water quality sampling, Tropical Audubon Society in Miami, Florida Keys Outfitters in the Keys, great fly fishing shop there in Islamorada. So those are just a few examples of organizations, businesses from across the state that recognize this need still exists and want to move the ball forward. There's Jim. So I'm going to wrap up here and invite Blair up to kind of bring it home. But the time has come. If you scan this QR code, you can sign our petition and join your name, add your voice to the chorus of people calling for this solution. Now is the time. It's feasible. It will predict the strength of our community and the future of our community. So I'll be happy to take questions, but I want to invite Blair up first to say a few words.
Hopefully I didn't turn it off. Can you guys hear me okay? Because it's important that I get this part right. And that's, I'm gonna sort of channel my inner Kenny Hinkle. And if he was here right now, he would have us doing something more than just sitting passively on our rears. So I think what we're gonna have is this side of the room by the land. By the land. By the land. By the land. Now, Kenny would probably be, maybe he would, I would, if I was his age, I might jump up on the dais there and get everybody really excited. But this was sort of what was going on in 2013. I remember talking to my dad, Carl Wickstrom, one of the leading voices in that lawsuit in 2006 to sue the Army Corps of Engineers for that. And Eve just mentioned that. And I think it's one of those things where we've forgotten a little bit about all the battles that we've waged in this fight. I mean, it's generational, unfortunately. And so in this particular case, like Eve said, it's not new. And back in the U.S. Sugar buyout, a dream that my dad had was this outdoor mecca. It was a sportsman's paradise. And the idea was, if we got this 180,000 acres of land, we need to flow it south. And the idea that he had even before that, this Plan 6 is the only fix. Who remembers that? The signs from Rivers Coalition, Plan 6 is the only fix. And that was, Plan 6 came from the Army Corps of Engineers. It was a plan that they devised to send water south. essentially a third outlet. Instead of it going east and west, the land would be used to convey water, dynamic storage south. It didn't happen. As Eve said, this isn't new. We've been fighting to get this third outlet, this idea of moving water south for decades. It led to the Law 6 in 2006. It was crazy how that unfolded. They basically said it's reached its statutes of limitations. The damage has been going on too long for us to hear the case. I mean, it was crazy, but we've got the ability to do this. And as Eve mentioned, we've got the ability to not only stop discharges here, but to make something special south of the lake. And the idea in that particular case is similar to what I was on 2 weeks ago with my friend Peter Upton. We went down and went up and we fished on Fellsmere Reservoir, now called Headwaters Lake. And the idea, again, what we saw in a creation of what used to be citrus fields and cattle land is now one of the best bass fishery in the state. And that's with 10,000 acres. And the picture that we had up earlier, there was an Aninga bird flying out of a cypress tree with a bunch of cattails. That was from a manufactured lake that isn't very old, and it's already producing record-sized bass. We can do that same thing, but 7 times that size. And so if we take that 70,000 acres and make it not a 23-foot deep with 34-foot high walls, but make it more of a natural lake. And that's key because it becomes far easier to maintain, and we can really, really get the benefits of a littoral zone that, you know, we're trying to fight for with Paul up in Lake Okeechobee, and that's something that is going to be far more natural in a shallow reservoir, a shallow lake, than really a deep pool. And so that's what we're trying to do with the rescue of the River of Grass. It's not new, as Eve said. You guys in here have been fighting for it more than anyone else. And I think in this particular case, it gives us something to finally do in terms of that, buy the land. It's 9 years. I mean, the clock is ticking. We have the money. We have to create the will, and we've got to find the sellers. And so I think with the support, with the support of people demanding it, I think we will come up with those sellers. So maybe one more time for Kenny. Buy the land, buy the land, buy the land. Where'd you guys? You're in the middle.
Yeah, well, we were doing both sides, I think.
Thanks, Blair. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Eve, and everybody. We're, you know, as Blair said, this coalition is not new to this. Carl Wickstrom days, and he and I used to get together and talk about Plan 6, and that came from these science subgroup and the recon study back in 93, 94, when they proposed what was then Plan 6 was between Miami, North New River Canal to connect with more river grass and restoring that. So this was done, and we were monitoring that. Plan 6 is the only fix to try to buy back that. And it's not new to buy back land in the EAA. In fact, it's considered that we had to do that. Back in a judge's decree in 1994, we bought about 50,000 acres to make Everglades, again, with STAs. So we had to build 6 STAs at that time, and the state was required to do that, and that's basically man-made marshes or restoring it to Everglades. And it was called the Everglades Construction Project, and it's used to treat. And then, again, we bought in 1999 the Talisman property, that about another 60,000 acres in the EAA from Talisman Sugar, who was going out of business. And that was to expand these blue areas, component A, B, and C. And B and C were to expand STA 2 and STA 5-6, but components A are in the middle of that, and component A was used to be the new EA reservoir, which was authorized back in year 2000 and one of the first WRDA projects. So that became, well, the mantra, let's get that done and get that going. So we had bought the land. The point is that I wanted to make is that land has been purchased. Again, in 2010, there was opportunity for the state to buy land, all 180,000 acres of U.S. sugar who wanted to divest. So at the time, there was options put together, but in 2010, we were only able to get about 27,000 acres to expand onto the STAs, those components, with an option for the next 10 years to buy the rest, which never got exercised by the next administration in the state. So land purchase, is the point in the EA, is not an old issue. And this organization, my organization at Florida Oceanographic, back in 2001, right after SERP got passed a resolution to buy land back in the EAA and restore that river of grass. That was our biggest thing, besides restore the Kissimmee River, keep the lake below those reasonable levels, and then let's buy that land back and restore the river of grass. So many of us have been involved in this in a long time. Our organization is signing on. It's going to sign on to this individually. We all kind of know where those locations are. If you need to refer back to maps and stuff, let's do that. But I think what we as a board talked about is our organization, this coalition, could sign on as well. So coalition is wanting to sign on. Do we have a membership? If you're a member of the coalition, can you raise your hand so we get a kind of a count and idea? Excellent. All right. So we want to put it up for a vote today. I would like to make a motion.
For the Rescue the River of Grass initiative. I also would like to say that the Marine Resources Council has authorized me to sign for them as well.
Individually for Oceanographic. I had a motion, second. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries unanimous. Thank you.
No time for questions.
All right, well, hey,
Take a win.
no, we do have a question or two, so we can take some time. Real important.
So we didn't have willing sellers before the U.S. sugar deal was brokered either, and that came to light through negotiations. And I think we have a real opportunity to demonstrate to these companies, which have imposed billions of dollars in cleanup costs on Floridians, that they can not only turn a profit by selling this land at market value, they can be part of the solution for the future of Florida. There are new generations of these families that own these companies now, and I think there can be a demonstrated will to sell the land. They're showing they're willing to take sugarcane out of cultivation now. Back when SB 10 was negotiated, they said, "Oh, we can't be willing sellers because we need all our cane in cultivation for our economies of scale," or whatnot. So I think we got to keep the pressure on, and I think they can do the right thing. U.S. Sugar is the Mott.
They're destroying our place here at the same time.
Yeah, it's good to talk about these names. You know, we say Big Sugar, but they're actually not that big. There are a couple of families, the Motts and the Fan Hools. So maybe we should stop calling them Big Sugar.
Okay. In memory of Kenny, do you think maybe we should start protesting again? Getting out on the bridges and on the road and going around like we did. We went to Fort Pierce, we went to Jupiter. And is that something we should start doing again? And can we get people that are interested in doing it?
I'm glad you're fired up. Sign up for Rescue the River of Grass, and we're going to have opportunities and petitions. I think when the water is green, as it will be again, we know that, that's when we show up, and we will.
It's really important, and a lot of us who've been in it for a long time feel like maybe we're re-energized to to keep things going. All right, we want to run through our kind of updates from the agencies and government folks. So we'll start with Martin County. We got John Mayle and Dr. Elizabeth there.
Real brief. I don't know. Sometimes I don't read the room very well. I have good news. We just finished our first quarter surveys. the last 2 weeks for our seagrass plantings. We're also doing some additional surveying just to kind of see the baseline conditions. And kind of to our surprise, it was much better than we thought it would be. Over the 8 sites that we surveyed, there was like 75% presence. And the density in those areas was like 5 to 25%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but our expectation was to find a lot of zeros. It was predominantly shoal grass. There was some paddle grass kind of in the northern parts. And then closer to the inlet, we saw predominant Johnson's grass. So we were encouraged. As we get in further into the dry season, we would expect that to be a good baseline for us to launch into a good recovery this summer.
Good update. Thanks, Mark County. All right. Not in this location, and they're planted in kind of more shallower areas that are not accessible and it's sporadic. So, but we are experimenting. There are research projects that we're doing with in conjunction with the county, but others to do seagrass kind of research on restoration research. And we do work with Cages and other folks up and down the Indian River Lagoon to take our units and put them out and do those kind of experiments. Yeah. Okay, Ben, you got any updates from Stewart? Other than Stewart's right here and they're looking to get on board soon, some environmental attorney, I believe, and we're anxious to see how that's going to happen, and maybe have some updates next time. South Florida Water Management District, I think we have Lawrence Glenn with us today. And Lawrence, you want to give us a little updates?
Don't have a presentation today, but we're here to talk about basically what's been going on with the recovery operations for Lake Okeechobee. Major Bell is going to come behind me and give a presentation and show where we are in that effort. When they started, they being the Corps, when they started recovery operations, there was about a 50-50 chance that we were going to be able to hit our targets, and that's 12 feet for 90 days or 11.5 feet for 60 days. And that's specifically for recover of SAV in Lake Okeechobee. So Lake Okeechobee's been pretty much imperiled for the past several years in the amount of SAV that's there. It's critical habitat for the bass fishery. There is concern about that bass fishery collapsing because it's just been no recruitment for a year or two. But he's going to come in and talk about that. And what we've seen over this dry season is Mother Nature has really helped out a bunch. And the success I think we're going to see from reaching the targets that we have, Major Bell will come in and show you that. So where we were all optimistic in the beginning, I think that optimism is really going to show that we will be successful in this upcoming year. The district is very well aware that spring is the time for reproduction. And in the estuaries, that means the oyster spawn is going to begin in March, fish spawn, production of zooplankton and phytoplankton. It's basically all the base of the food web as well as the critters themselves. So that kicks off coming up here, a week away or so in March. Salinity levels that I present to my governing board every month. We show 10 to 25, and that's for adult survivorship. But we know that spat require a higher salinity of about 15. So we're going to be monitoring that as we go forward to see if we need to reduce discharge volumes or just quit discharge in order to get to those salinities that are most favorable for survivorship of the different spawn that's going to happen coming up. So we are diligent. We'll be keeping our eyes on that, and I think that you're going to see some really good information from Major Bell on how recovery operations is going.
Thanks, Lawrence. While we've got you, I have constantly been. It's a partnership here, managing the lake. It's not just the Corps. The district has a part in this too. And our question is always, during recovery operations as well as these discharges, we know we put some east, we put some west, try to stay within the recovery metrics to not overwhelm the estuary and turn it fresh. But why aren't we putting more south? Why isn't it maximum practicable? Why can't we put more south than we're doing right now and stop doing it east?
Sure. So we have been doing maximum practicable to the to south. We've been sending Until about a week or so ago, we were sending 1,100 CFS through the STAs. That was reduced to 700 in the STAs, sending 600 through 3-4 and 100 through 5-6. We have terminated for the moment sending through STA2. Reason being, there's nuisance floating aquatic vegetation in the intake canals for that STA. If we get that type of plant life in the STA itself, it really creates a lot of havoc. It's not anything that's useful for reducing phosphorus, and it actually is a hindrance to the other plants and what's going on in those STAs to be the most beneficial. Ms. Samples talked earlier about our ability to, we have a Q-Bell coming in just a couple years that says this is the quality of water we have to send south. So we're being a bit protective of those STAs to ensure that they're going to be top-notch, ready to go, so we can hit that Q-Bell to send the quality of water that we all want to send south.
Well, as you know, we're protective of this estuary too, and this river, so we're constantly wanting to not artificially overload it with water and nuisance vegetation such as blue-green algae blooms. All right, well, let's partner up here and get the core. Major Bell, you want to join us in? And thank you, Jason, for also coming.
All right, so slides real quick. I do have Mr. Engel with us as well, Jason Engel from our hydrology team out of Jacksonville headquarters. So he's here to answer any technical questions that you may have that I cannot answer. So real quickly, the first slide is going to be kind of our strategy of how we kind of discussed how we're going to do operations and our new battle rhythm per se, and how we can communicate that to the public and to the agencies internally as well. A lot of behind the scenes actions. So if we want to go to the next slide, please. So this is kind of laid out. So the big one we had just a few weeks ago was a mid-season point, touch point that we had with everybody to include our stakeholder community and to receive feedback from our state agencies, federal agencies, and along with the community as well, both north, south, east, and west of Lake Okeechobee. Next slide. So we presented this slide. Oh, so rainfall. Okay, so we kind of looked. We had, the last 7 days, obviously we had a spike right above average rainfall for the last 7 days. But if you look next 7 days, it looks drier, right? So that's great news. And then over the last 30 days, you can see we're below average rainfall. So it's just another data point as you look at things, as we look at things, as we process through our processes and things, how we kind of look at it. And I think the next slide is going to be the one that's probably the most interesting. So what the highlight here is what I want you to look at is the south, right? So if you Google SAJ water management, you can pull this up and you can see the different, Kissimmee, C44 and South Dade conveyance system. But look at the flows there. So we averaged our model around 2,000 CFS south, right? So you can see in this snapshot on the 26th, where we averaged over 7 days, 1,600 or so CFS, right? So why I bring that up is we had this rain event, and that, as we go to, I don't know what the next slides are, but as we pull up the next slides, you can see the spike here that we saw from that local rainfall event that we had. So that's kind of how we're looking at how we're managing the system. We're still within the ecological envelope of lake recovery. We're still moving forward on lake recovery operations. And we have a projection that will stay about this over the next several days. As we can see the environment change, it'll obviously change. But you could see before the rain event, a nice steep curve from the recession coming off the lake, indicating that we're having success to be able to drive down to the metrics, performance metrics that we're using for lake recovery. So next slide. All right, so I presented this back in November of the modeling. This is called a SWIMS model. So we presented this with, possibility, right? And there was a lot of kind of negative energy in the room that we weren't going to make the targets. So today, this is where we fall, right? The red dot is where we are today. So you can be positive and you can say we're ahead of schedule, or we can say, what does this really say? So if you look at the bottom, you kind of see the days below 12, and you can kind of see, okay, well, back in that time, remember, this is a snapshot when we run these models based on, inputs and assumptions. This is where we're going to be. And so we're ahead of schedule. So now we ran a model on the 26th. You see the blip there from the rain event. Okay, But now look at the data. So you see there's 3 different scenarios there at the bottom. You can kind of read those. Stopping flows to the east on the 1st of March, reducing flows to the west a little bit later in the season. And you can kind of see the performance metrics there, the 12 feet and the 11.5, right? So if you go back real quick, ma'am. So look at that 01484, right? Or 64, I'm sorry, I can't see, I'm old. 64, so go next slide. So you can see a huge improvement on where we're gonna be from a metric standpoint, right? If you're just looking at the metrics themselves, a larger success rate, right? The higher probability of succeeding the standards for what we consider for metrics for lake recovery. And you can kind of see those 3 different scenarios play out on where we're gonna be on 1 May, 1 June, you know, depending on what you look at as a target for reduction of flows. And as Mr. Lawrence discussed on estuary management and how we're looking at oyster spawn and habitats, we're taking all that into consideration, right? So, you know, we had a very lengthy discussion before this meeting. Mr. Engel and I were on talking about what are we going to do? What are we looking at? How are we looking at the environment? What are we going to make changes? When are we going to make those changes? How are we going to communicate those changes? We're still moving forward on recovery ops. Even if we were to stop flows through S80, we're still in recovery operations, right? Those are not going to stop. So if we see indicators from the environment, if we see increased rain events, we still have the option and the ability, the flexibility under this to continue flows. But we're not changing anything the next 7 days. So remember, we build our schedules on a 7-day window. So from March 1st to March 7th, or the Saturday after next, it still will be a target of 1,200 CFS through S80. But remember, there's also rainfall events, right? So that it drives the C44 basin. It's not just the lake. So if you look at S308, those flows have been very small. So a lot of the flows coming through the S80 is from the basin itself. And we are doing some operations with South Florida Water Management District to rehydrate the STAs and the C44. So we are taking some off that canal, but it's not enough to be able to see an impact. And again, with our modeling, if we were to stop flows, it's kind of negligible on where we would see, but we still see success. So it's a high probability that we're going to meet these metrics. It's just when we'll reduce those flows. And again, it won't be a complete shut the gates. It'll be a ramp down. We got to step down on those gates. And then we also have to balance a lot of different things, but we're looking at the estuary as well, especially with oyster spat season coming up and trying to manage those. And it's good news that the seagrasses are healthy and there's stuff there. So a higher probability of having clean water later in the season as well once we reduce operations and go into normal operations for LOSUM. So we're in the next slide, I think, or is that it? Okay. So any questions? I know we don't have a lot of time.
Just real quick, and we'll go there. But if we're forecasting to make that target by
So we're very hopeful and we're very excited because we see that there's a higher success, right? So we don't see where we are right now, right? If the environment changes, where we see a lot of increased rainfall, models are. So if you want to get into the details, we can get to the details. But the European model is showing the next 14 days increased rainfall, but we can't guess off that, right? So the best we can do is 7 days. Next 7 days is going to be dry. So what does that mean? We'll increase flows to the south for water supply. The basins are going to soak up more water through the rivers, right? So those things can change the calculus, but in reality, we still see we're going to meet our goals with recovery operations. But unless the environment changes and we start to see increased rainfall event where we're not going to be successful, we can reevaluate that. That's the beauty of LOSUM. Allows us the flexibility to be able to take all these different things into account and make decisions. The commander can see it's laid out, takes the input from South Florida Water Management along with our state and federal agencies, and then he makes a decision on where to move out on where we see things. Week to week. That was the meeting that Mr. Engel and I were in just before this, is our water management call that him and I sit on every week, and we discuss these in detail with all of our different staff and experts from our scientists and biologists, all bring up information, and then we also review all the state agencies and federal agencies' inputs from the weekly meetings we have on Tuesdays for those agencies, and we discuss those And then today we're providing him about outbrief on this meeting on kind of how things are perceived as well. So it's a constant touch point with the commander on how we're doing these operations. It's not really done in a vacuum, and it's taking everyone's input into consideration before he makes that decision.
So we had one question over here, and then I'll come back to Jim, and then maybe one more.
Under LOSUM, how many years will it be before you do another recovery operation?
5 years, right? Yeah, so 5 years is, so got to stay positive. So we're going to be successful this year, right? Positive mindset, we'll be successful. And the anticipation is the next 5 years, you would not see flows from Lake O. So remember, you have the C-44 reservoir, right? So that collects basin runoff, and it, also makes releases through that structure out of the S-80, but it's a little bit different. It's treated water, right? So I don't want to that's getting technical, but there still could be releases through S-80, just not through S-306. So
Is there something in LOSUM that even says if it gets down to 13 feet during what season or something that there wouldn't be for another period of time, you wouldn't do it the following year? I mean, I guess the question is like, are we going to have to do this every year?
no.
Yeah, I thought there's some concern about that.
Yeah. So it says in the water control plan, it says 5 years. So.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah, I just want you to consider too that remember that the estuary is also a temporary habitat for billions of migratory fish. And if the St. Lucie isn't here, it's no longer the habitat for them on their transitory march north. So May, it starts the beginning of the billions of between the menhaden and the predators and all the food fish, the silver mullet, and everything like that depend upon our estuary for their trip north.
Gil, real quick.
Yeah, so if you look at the swims model, it's kind of exciting because it looks around mid-April or so, we're going to hit that 12 feet, right? So, not only 4 weeks, 6 weeks from now, we could be in a position to be able to say we are successful on Lake O recovery operations, Lauro, and we will move into normal ops, which would reduce flows both east and west as we move forward. But that's, again, predictive. We can't go that far yet.
So Friends of the Everglades, our organization, has been tracking the detrimental effects of the discharges, and I believe we submitted some documentation to you folks last week. Would it be possible to get from the Corps a list of the beneficial effects of the discharges? In other words, would it be, we're not just lowering the lake for the sake of lowering the lake. We're lowering the lake to achieve specific environmental gains. Could we get, on a monthly basis, it would be very helpful to see this, are we seeing those gains yet? What gains are we seeing? Can you quantify any gains?
So that's a great question. I think what we've discussed at the staff level internally and within the Jacksonville district is post-operations, probably next fall, December-ish timeframe, depending. We're gonna kind of lay out, have what's called an action review, an Armory term AAR. So we're gonna have kind of a taking input in from everybody, laying out what we saw, what kind of things we looked at, and how we adjusted those operations based on conditions in the environment. And what were the outputs of those, right? Did we see increased growth? Did we see decreased growth? Did bass fisheries increase or decrease, right? Juvenile bass need SAV. So if you look at some other charts, so we're going to kind of lay all that out once we're completed and we can have that information. But to do it on a weekly, daily, monthly basis is infeasible from a practicality standpoint for us to execute those contracts.
I think
Mr. Engel?
Yeah, I think the district also reports on that monthly, some sort of recovery metrics that you do for the lake, right? Lawrence Glenn? Yeah.
Yeah, so what I was going to say is in those meetings that we have that I showed at the beginning, right? The list of meetings that we hold, that kind of information is going to start coming out through those, right? So if there's new survey data from the lake for SAV, if and when that comes available, then that will be shown in real time. But ultimately, as Major Bell said, our commanders said he wants a report to understand, was it successful? What happened on the lake, right? And then document that. So that's definitely going to happen, but we have to wait for all the data to come in. But along the way, I think we're going to start seeing those results come out, in those periodic public meetings that we have.
Good point. Maybe one more here.
Yeah, the question I think is to the Corps. We're using 12 feet as sort of a baseline. And I recall, and I don't have the figures, but it was something like 70% of the time over the last 50 years, this estuary had damaging discharges if the lake was at 12 feet or higher on June 1st. So nearly all the time, 70% of the time. And then now we're using that as sort of almost like a good number if we can get there for a few weeks. And so are we, I mean, again, we all benefit if the lake is held lower than 12 feet at the start of the rainy season. And so, again, I know that's what LOSUM was about, and we were trying to figure out, you know, the plan and everything, but it just seems crazy that we would use 12 feet as is like our goal by June 1st. It really needs to be much lower, you know, like 11 feet or 10 feet. And, but as long as you guys are aware of that, and we just have to keep that for us as the goal. And I don't know if you can speak to that.
Well, what I would say about that, there's a couple things to it, right? First of all, the recovery metrics like the 12 feet or the 11 and a half feet that's for the recovery mode was really from the science of submerged aquatic vegetation recovering in the lake. So that number comes from the ability of the grasses to grow as the lake stage goes down. However, your point's well made that the stage of the lake at the beginning of the wet season very much dictates whether we will get to high releases. But the thing about that I would say is LOSOM doesn't trigger those higher releases until we get to 16 feet or higher. LORS, the previous lake regulation schedule, would have flows to both estuaries at much lower stages. And it wasn't even always in that LORS 2008 schedule. It was both the stage of the lake, but also the rate of rise, because we were in need of that HHD rehabilitation, right? That was the big thing that allowed us to operate the lake differently for LOSOM. So we're no longer triggering estuary releases at, 14, 15 feet like you would have seen in those previous years. So 12 feet is still, a good number at the beginning of the wet season, but we're not triggering them until they get much higher than in the past.
So after the recovery operations is completed, then we're going to be back into the regular management band where between 10 and a half and 16 and a half, you're not making zero releases to this estuary and only beneficial to the Caloosahatchee.
That's right. So
while sending the water south.
Right. So recovery will go on. Recovery is unlikely to extend into the wet season.
Okay.
And releases to the St. Lucie are likely to end sooner than that. But then you go back to zero until you get up to, 16 feet or more.
I thank you for the updates and stuff. I know I appreciate Major Bell and Jason here being very available. So contact them afterwards, get their contact info, and in between our monthly meetings, and obviously we can contact them. They've been very available to talk to people and give us some updates that way too. So appreciate that. Thank you very much for coming up. Let's go on to what's next. We've got Dr. Paul Gray. He's right over here. Here's Paul. Yeah, on Lake O.
Hi. Yeah, so you've already heard all about the lake. To Gil's question, we talk about SAV a lot, just like in the estuary, we talk about seagrasses. But as you brought up, it's about fish and everything else. And so the seagrasses are just an index, and the SAV is too. And so right now the lake's drawing down, and the last couple of years, until you get to 15 feet, it doesn't start drying out. You don't have that moving line of drying. And the last couple of years, we didn't get to 15 feet till after the whole winter migratory season. And so the shorebirds that are down here, there's like 20 species, the wading birds, the dabbling ducks, they just couldn't use the lake the last 2 years. And that drawdown line, if you start at Okeechobee and go all the way down past go down past Clewiston and Moorhaven and over to Belglade, that line is 50 miles long. And so right now it is drawing down. I was out there about a week ago. There's a lot of wading birds out there. There's shorebirds. I couldn't quite get back to where the most shorebirds probably were, but because I had too many people in the boat and I didn't want to get stuck. But anyway, so that drawdown line is happening this year for the first time in 3 years. So that's a positive. And there's also a short hydro period plant zone that when the lake's too deep, it can't grow because it's just too much water for it. And so the goal for that is 25,000 acres. It's down to about 5, the latest count. And this drawdown will help restore that zone too. So again, we talk about SAV, but there's a lot of things going on. So we'll see if we can get down to the full realization of what we want to get, but there are some benefits from this. So thanks.
So thanks, Paul. So back to kind of Blair's question, if we can get some updates as to, is it helpful to get the lake down? Because I know we've even talked about, well, if you don't make that target of the 12 feet for 60 days or 90 days, and then the 11.5 for, 90 days, 60 days, then what, if it still gets lower by June 1st, I mean, that's better for the lake to at least have some sort of recovery. Right?
Yeah, and Lawrence reports to the governing board every week or every month about how many wading birds are counted on the lake and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So the data will come in.
So the wading birds can be used as a metric, other things can be used as a metric to how is it doing?
And
Not just wait for the SAV to grow, in other words.
well, they don't need the SAV. They're doing other stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so but this gets back to the point that Eve was talking about. We've got a limited system and we got to build a lot more stuff. And until we do that, we're going to be stuck in this position where we harm the lake, we harm the estuary. Actually, we harm them both. So we need to rebuild this system and do SERP and all that stuff. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you, and none of us want that. Well, let's talk about the state and federal legislation update. We'll go to Gil, since he's here. Thanks, Gil.
That's good. Hi, folks. So Florida's legislative session begins next week, March 4th, runs 60 days. It'll end May 2nd. We've been taking a look at some of the bills that have been filed. There's, as usual, there's a few good ones. There's a whole ton of bad ones. It's going to be another session of sprawl, as we've called it in the past. There's quite a few bills out there that are seeking to facilitate, make it easier and quicker to develop and build in and around Florida. Like I said, a few good bills as well. One of the bills we are tracking has to do with state parks. That's why I'm all dressed up today, because I just had a meeting on that this morning. That bill, the two bills, House and Senate bill, both filed by local politicians, Harrell and Snyder, is it needs to be tougher, and that's what we're asking for. But the one bill in particular that may interest this group is Senate Bill 7002. It has to do with water management districts, and it very much seems targeted at the South Florida Water Management District in particular. It is requiring all sorts of new transparency, which is good. It's being styled as a good government bill. But it would have a significant fiscal effect, or could have a significant fiscal effect on the district, which, among other things, for example, if they determine that a new capital project is needed, like another STA, we're not cutting you're not cutting cutting it with the current STAs, we got to build a new one. They would probably have to go to referendum to ask the voters to actually fund that. There are other aspects of it as well that would ultimately could affect the ability to continue spending on Everglades projects at the rate at which we have been spending these past couple of years. There's one that says the Water Management District can't budget out. When it's budgeting out for the coming years, it can't assume that state funding will rise. That means ultimately they may cap what the expenditures are. And if that happens, federal expenditures, matching funds could also be capped. So there's a lot of sort of moving parts to this bill. It's already had its first hearing and passed. We're keeping an eye on that. And we're going to be doing, Friends of the Everglades will be doing our legislative preview tomorrow at noon with Eve and myself talking about some of this legislation. So if you all want to tune in, that'd be great.
Yeah. Any on federal?
On the federal front, as you may have seen, Department of Interior has cut staffing at the national parks and national wildlife refuges, among many other places. But at Friends of the Everglades, our founder, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, was a crusader for creation of Everglades National Parks, that we feel really firmly that we need to speak up and protect those park resources. So we do have a targeted action where you can contact your member of Congress, Senate or House, to let them know that you want our national parks and wildlife refuges fully funded. So just go to everglades.org if you're interested in that.
It's great. Yeah. So there are agencies that are kind of in jeopardy right now, if you will, by the whole kind of government efficiency situation that's going on. A lot of people are real concerned about layoffs, and that's inclusive of agencies like in Department of Commerce, NOAA, National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, who does a lot of grants and grant funding. Also EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, funds our national estuary programs, particularly here, the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program. All this funding, as the grant funding gets cut and it's frozen right now, is not coming through to continue the funding and not only scientific research, but also the restoration efforts and things that are trying to be done through the agencies. Yeah. Yeah. So Department of Defense, I'm not sure how much the Corps might be in situation too. So everything's kind of in flux up there, but like Eve said, the best thing is to contact our congressmen, our representatives up there, and be able to have communication with them to try to see what's going on and what's next. So what's next on our agenda is coalition updates. First hear from River Kids. Casey's with us today.
Thank you, and Kelly's online as well, so thanks. I'm going to do this a little bit differently since I have control of the Zoom today. I'm going to let the River Kids actually speak for themselves. They presented at the IRL Symposium on Friday, and hopefully this works. Let me know, Zoom people, if it works for you. So this was the River Kids.
Okay, we have
presentation.
River Kids for the future of the IRL.
Hi, my name is
I don't know if
Finley.
the sound's coming
I'm
through, but
13
there
years
in the
old and I'm
corner.
a part of River Kids.
Try to.
Hi, my name is Eleanor. I'm 11 years old and I'm also part of River Kids. What we do. So we did a beach cleanup after Hurricane Milton tornadoes when there was all the styrofoam on the beach. We have done speeches and presentations. We went to a River Watch protest to advocate for little-known areas that might have a big impact on our river if not taken care of. We've done protests. We spoke at the Jonathan Dickinson rally to let the community know that we do not want golf courses in a state park. And we've done community activities. One of them, we went to a water fest to meet new possible River Kids and tell people about what River Kids do. And why we do it. So one of the main reasons River Kids wants to do this stuff is because most of us really enjoy fishing, paddleboarding, kayaking, and exploring. But if our water is polluted or unsafe to be around, we couldn't do any of that. We also really care about the animals in their homes. There are 4,300 plants and animals living in the Indian River Lagoon, and every time another condo gets built, the animals have to try and find a new home. We feel strongly that the animals deserve a home much more than tourists deserve condos. And we believe that kids should speak up for what they believe in. The River Kids not only teaches kids and adults about the problem the Florida ecosystems are facing and what we can do to fix them, but also shows kids that their voice matters, and despite the fact that kids can't vote, we also have a say in things.
All right, the problems we are fighting. The main problem right now that we are fighting are the Lake Okeechobee discharges. They're bad because they are pumping billions of gallons into the St. Lucie River each month. They cause salinity, oxygen, and water quality to drop drastically, causing massive die-offs in many plant and animal populations. As of mid-February 2025, the salinity level of the river dropped to 0%. This will negatively impact many fish, but we will also see a large decrease in the oyster population and seagrass population. What we can do to stop this is to send the water south through the Florida Everglades so it can go into the Florida Bay and supply the Florida Bay with much needed water. Also, another problem we are facing is the building on all of our state parks. If we protect the state parks, many animals will be saved and their homes will also be saved as well. We do not need any more gas stations or golf courses built anywhere in Florida. We have enough already. Oh, shoot. Call to action. The time to act is now. We must do something before we lose our incredibly unique and diverse ecosystem. As River Kids, we encourage you to be better caretakers of our environment and to show the same level of care for our plants and animals as we do.
Thank you.
Okay, so anytime you try to,
Excellent
Anytime
time
you try-
management and use of the microphone.
so I'm sorry for in the room if you didn't hear that. I will have Mickey include that in the next, a link to that in the next newsletter, and you can watch it online if you didn't get to hear. But hopefully you could see how passionate the River Kids are about what they do. They are the next generation that will hopefully get to enjoy all of the fights that you guys have done for the last 30 years. So thank you to all of the legacy members of the Rivers Coalition, and please know that this will continue into the future, and hopefully they will be getting to fish and hike and explore more than they have to protest. So thank you so much. Coming up, we have some events that we will be involved in, and we are looking forward to sending out some updates. We're asking some of our River Kids families to volunteer at tabling events. We have a lot of events that we get asked to, and the three of us, Kelly, Sabrina, and I, we only have so many places that we can be at once. So if anybody is wanting to volunteer and be a larger part of River Kids, please reach out to us. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Casey. Yeah, we're the Indian River Lagoon Symposium was great. There was 2 days of really great presentations, including the River Kids, and a lot of student presentations at that event too. Jim and I and others have been attending those for every year for many years, and it's great to see the science and the research coming together with students, and now the River Kids being there too to help with that forum. So appreciate all that. Moving on to Speakers Bureau, I think Todd's here, right?
I am. I'm
We can
Todd
get the
Weissman.
River Kids to be on part of the Speakers Bureau.
You just
There
took
you
my line
go.
away.
Oh, there we go.
I've got a speaking engagement tonight. It's with the St. Lucie Power Squadron. Usually Jim Harder or myself speak at these events. I'm going to get the kids there. They'll fill the house. But let me do say that if you are a member of an organization, or you have a friend or a family member, a neighbor, this is our outreach program. See me after the meeting, or go to our website and click request a speaker. We will come to any meeting. It doesn't matter how many people attend. We're happy to speak. So call on us.
Thank you, Todd. So I have a quick local water quality update. I think if I could bring those up, that'd be great. Okay, that'd be great. All right, look at you. All right. So we just kind of wanted to do that. Here's the water flows over the year. This past year, you can see the big dip that came down after we started those discharges. Remember, it dipped down also at the last year in the fall from those big high rise of discharges. Those are from the local basin runoff, but the red values are from the lake. So if you remember back in last year, beginning February, March, we were getting discharges from the lake. Then we got this, it started to recover, looked real good in the summer, but then we got bad water quality when we had this local basin runoff, started to recover, but then we started getting the next slide. So we started getting bad water quality. So if you just flip through these slides, this is kind of the timing on when these kind of started to happen. We do a weekly water quality testing. You can continue. We have 40 water testers that are out there in the estuary that do weekly water testing, and we put them together. So in recent times, it's just been this very deterioration, particularly in the South Fork, obviously, where we get the input from Lake Okeechobee on C-44. So if you go to the next slide, I don't know if that's queued up. This is kind of the graph from the USGS salinity stations right here on Roosevelt Bridge, the middle estuary. It normally is up around 25 to parts per thousand. Seawater is 35, freshwater 0, and you can see it's dropped down below that stress and harm and even mortality level. And if it stays there for too long, oysters begin to die back. And as Lawrence mentioned earlier, that even juveniles and the spat settlement is even more vulnerable for the duration of time that this estuary stays fresh. The next slide. These are comparisons of kind of the pre-release in October last year to the spat settlement, and then post-release after December 7th. You can go to the next slide. I don't know if the video worked, but just the comparison again from pre-release. That's okay. You can just see the images here. This is underwater here at one of the sites at Pendarvis Cove site. You can see the oyster reefs there prior to the release sites, and then after December 7th when they started, the turbidity levels just get stirred up, and it just is not good for oyster reefs. So if you want to know more about our water testing, go to our website, floridaocean.org. And that's it for that. Kind of as was mentioned, the seagrass, I've been out there recently, of course, on the flats offshore. There's some small growth back of seagrass around the flats at Sailfish Point inside the inlet. It's mostly, as John said, Halophila or some shoal grass coming back, but very small. I also saw some queen conch out there, which is encouraging. And, you know, we just need it to give it time to recover. And that's why we're all anxious to let the estuary be the estuary and the lagoon be the lagoon, and not to have these artificial discharges to it. River keeper update, Jim Moyer.
Yeah, so as Mark pointed out, the turbidity is a serious issue for seagrass recovery, and it's coming from both the dredging operations at the inlet as well as the discharges from the river. And it's going to be really challenging to have a good year for seagrass with all of these turbidity issues. There have been a considerable number of manatees in the estuary. Please look out for them. Several of them have been hit by boats, and several of them have been swallowing fishing gear and having some pretty serious intestinal problems from that mortality because of it. The kids have been fantastic. The river kids were really inspirational. There was a young lady from Rockledge who was an 11th grader who has been doing water quality analysis for 6 years, and she's developing her own robotics in order to be able to do algae removal as well as water quality sampling. And this is the future. This is really where we have a chance at allowing these estuaries and natural areas to recover and survive. And I hate to put it all on the shoulders of the kids, but we need to support them and their efforts to tell us what needs to be done.
Great, thanks, Jim. All right, we got time for some member comments or announcements. Merritt, and then some others. Come on up. Here you go, Merritt.
No, not, well, there was some that I don't want to get glossed over that's pretty important, that Blake kind of brought up today, that everyone in this room, City of Stewart, all the board members worked really hard along with the state agencies and federal agencies on LOSUM, and that's enacted now. And I don't want to get a gloss over what we heard today, and I want to maybe get a confirmation of it, though, that pretty much guaranteed for the next 5 years, LOSUM is enacted. It's in our first water year. We're jumping right into the recovery operations in that first water year. But after that, under LOSUM, we won't go into lake recovery operations for another 5 years. So correct me if I'm wrong, but for the next 5 years, for the next 5 water years, unless the lake is above 16 feet, we will not receive discharges, regulatory discharges from Lake Okeechobee. Is that correct, Major Bell? I'm just, because it was very important what I heard, or, I mean.
So this is what I would say. We are right on the edge of success with this, right? You saw the 90 days. We cross those triggers, we can declare success for this recovery operation. Then we go back to normal LOSUM, right? And that means no releases from the lake east to either the St. Lucie or the Lake Worth Lagoon. unless we get up into that zone, what's called Zone BC, which is above 16 feet, varying seasonally, but always above 16 feet. That's right. Right. So recovery mode is, and I'm going to say this, right? It's very unlikely to be triggered, but there isn't anything in LOSOM that said thou shalt not do it for 5 years. I will just say that. Now, the fact is, if we declare success on this, it's not something that's going to be tried every year. The way that we modeled it is if you do it 1 year and you have to call it off because you're completely unsuccessful, then it was actually tried again the next year. We're beyond that point, right? We're so close now, we're going to end up getting below 12. Yeah, so that's what I'll say. There isn't anything forbidding us from doing it again, but the intention was if you're successful, you're not going to need to look at it for on the order of 5 years.
So is it a bass fishery or aquatic vegetation triggers that need for recovery again? What is trigger?
There are multiple triggers. So if the lake has not gotten down to 11 feet in 5 years, if it has not gotten below 13 feet over the course of several years, if the submerged aquatic vegetation is less than 3,000 or less than 11,000, I'm sorry, it's at 3,000 now. It's less than 11,000. So all of those are possible triggers for this, right? None of them make it a certainty to do it. And if you trigger one, then it's a conversation. If you trigger all of them, which is basically what happened this year, then it's going to be more compelling. But right now, we stand a very reasonable chance of touching 11, which is a pretty important metric. It seems very likely that we'll get below 12 for an extended period of time, and that we will get SAV recovery, which if we can get over 11,000, you know, that's another metric. So there are multiple metrics.
The lake recovery, that's focused on the lake ecology, right? But like, we can't predict what the hurricane season, right? The ACE hasn't even come out yet. We have no idea what that looks right. So as we get those interoperability bands around BC, right, we got to have hard discussions, right? So I don't want to say we're never going to have to operate the S80 under flood risk management perspective, right? So it's impossible to know. It's too far away. Our best guess is 7 days with our current science, right? So 14 is a little squishy, and you get past that, who knows? The Corps looks at everything. We try to make the best decisions, balancing the 5 requirements we have authorized by Congress to do what we got to do, and understanding what we are doing to the estuaries as well. I mean, it's a very complex problem. Lots of things we're trying to manage and influencing to include your estuary, right? So it's very difficult for the decisions that we have with the commander on operations and what the future looks right. But it's hard to say that we'll never do something, right? It's an impractical thing, you know, but from a Lake O recovery operation standpoint, yes. I mean, that's kind of what we're looking at. But again, I can't predict what the hurricane season's gonna look like or what 5 years is gonna look like, right? It's just impractical to make those determinations today. It's like a chalk line, right? Today, yeah, sure, but I don't know what tomorrow brings. Correct. So the next version of LOSOM 2.0, whatever, like you're probably 5 to 6 years away from that, from being implemented. As the EAA is getting closer, we have a better timeline on where we are in construction activities. A2S2 interops is moving forward, right? There's all these things that are happening as we get these pieces of the puzzle with INSERP on the table and able to use and flex those abilities to do water management operations. It changes how we look at different things, right? So, as we get closer along these timelines, you're going to have a different type of LOSOM that's going to be discussed. It'll be the same process of LOSOM that everyone experienced here. All that data will be put in, probably even more model runs as efficiencies and models get better to be able to provide better water management techniques. But, we're going to be under this for at least 5 to 6, 7 years, depending. But yes, there will be another LOSOM. Like, the process doesn't stop. We can continue to go through these iterations to make water operations the efficiencies when we have new abilities to perform different operations.
Major,
Thanks.
based
Yep.
upon the fact that you are between a hard pan and a rock, I've raised you to colonel. Now, the thing I wanted to say is this: Joe Giglio, Lake Okeechobee Restoration Initiative. you have to distinguish the fact that there are two different kind of ecosystems that are involved. The first one is Lake Okeechobee, and the second one is the river and the estuary. Now, the grasses, the SAVs, or the grasses that are in both systems, look almost identical, but physiologically, they are different. The freshwater grasses in Lake Okeechobee, that's mostly Vallisneria americana, has to stay in fresh water. It can't go much higher than about 5 parts per thousand, which is little. Whereas the seagrasses, and there are many varieties, about 7 different varieties of seagrasses, they must have salt. They vary. The point is that the salt environment for both of these grasses are different. But both grasses, the lake and the river and the estuary, when I say river, I mean estuary connected, they need clear water. Right now, Lake Okeechobee has a very turbid situation. And that's why, in order to get the SAVs, the freshwater grasses to grow in the lake, is one of the reasons why the South Florida, Corps of Engineers lowers the lake. That's one reason. And Lawrence left, I guess, but he and I pretty well had a discussion that if the lake's turbidity could be decreased, if the turbidity could be reduced so that light transmission would be much greater, that lake could be held higher. Now, I realize that causes a problem for birds. I'm not denying that. But what that would mean is that the lake would not have just 11,000 acres of SAV. My calculation is based upon what's called a hypsographic, I'm not going to get into it, up to 100,000 acres. And the reason why I say this, because the lakes that I have done, 600, 700 lakes around here, small stuff, I can get down to these same grasses, these same freshwater grasses growing into that level. So if the lake could be cleaned up a little bit, which reduces turbidity, the grasses would grow. You wouldn't have to fluctuate the lake level up and down so much, which is not necessarily good for the fish and may not even be good enough for the birds. So what my firm is doing is trying to do the research to try to find out, can we clean up Lake Okeechobee? You clean up Lake Okeechobee and you discharge, you're not going to get the muck and the mud that is now causing the major problems in the seagrasses in the river.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks. Good comments. Thanks, and thanks also for Paul for being here too, for Health of the Lake and trying to focus in on that. All right. Thanks, everybody.